Okay, well, hello, IFA friends. I'm Mike Layman, and welcome to today's Franchisee Town Hall program. This is the first of our Franchisee Town Hall programs offered in partnership with Franchise Update Media. And greetings from IFA World Headquarters here in Washington, D.C. We're thrilled you would join us, and you hope you will continue to join us all summer because today's program is the first of what will be an 8-part series this summer to talk franchisee issues. Think of this series as being interesting people talking about interesting issues, all on the franchise matters of the day. And you get to hear from and ask questions to our special guest speakers on these town halls. We have a couple of very special guest speakers today we'll introduce you to in a moment, but you're welcome at any point to just click on the Q&A box on your screen to submit a question, and we'll be happy to field as many of those as we can. Again, we hope you can join us for all 8 programs of this Town Hall series on Wednesdays through the summer, because we know how busy you are running your businesses. But at the same time, there's never been more public policy issues coming at the franchise community. And we will share everything you need to know as a franchise owner on this town hall series in the weeks ahead. At the end of today's program, we'll share the full town hall schedule. It should also be in your email, but we'll give you an opportunity on the screen, a QR code, to register for our next town hall, which will be next Wednesday in the same time slot, 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Pacific, and that's next Wednesday, May 24th. And next week, our second town hall, we will dig into the role of the Federal Trade Commission and how it regulates franchise businesses like yours. It's a can't miss conversation that'll really catch you up on an opaque agency that a lot of us in franchising don't have familiar with. So, but first, we have a great program to kick off our series today. And our topic today, as you see, is government impact on your bottom line. And we have 2 dynamite special guests on today's town hall. With us today is our friend John Ring, who is a partner at IFA member law firm Morgan Lewis. And he's the former chairman of the National Labor Relations Board. And you'll hear more about the NLRB from John in just a minute. But first, you will hear from the Honorable Rodney Davis, our other friend. Rodney is a former member of Congress from Illinois and the original chair of the Congressional Franchise Caucus. And Rodney, in fact, hails from a franchising family himself. And again, as you listen to today's town hall, you are welcome at any point to pose your questions to our special guest speakers in the Q&A window at the bottom of your screen. Okay, let's dig right in. Let's welcome our special guest, Rodney Davis. Welcome to today's IFA Town Hall.
Well, Mike, it's great to be with you, and Chairman Ring, it's great to see you. Always great to join a panel with you on. Look, I'm excited to be part of the Franchise Association, Mike. As you mentioned, I grew up in a franchise family, and my dad, my mom were McDonald's operators. My dad still is. My brother is. So because of franchising, my family achieved the American dream, and I was able to achieve the American dream and serve in the United States House for 10 years.
That's great, Rodney. Well, we're thrilled you're here. Thank you for being here. You clearly know franchising well, and the extended IFA family knows you pretty well too. But for those who don't know you, you and your family have been running franchise businesses all your life. Tell us a little bit about your specific history in franchising.
You know what, Mike? My dad walked into a McDonald's restaurant in 1959, the first one that was built in Des Moines, Iowa, and he never left. He decided that one day he wanted to own his own franchise. So he worked his way up, just like many franchise owners in all across the franchising sector have done. They worked their way up. He worked his way up as a grill person, a counter person. He worked his way up as manager, crew chief, etc. Then was a regional supervisor. And in 1977, my dad's dream came true and he was offered a franchise, which moved us from Des Moines, Iowa to my hometown where I live and where I represented Congress for 10 years, and that's Taylorville, Illinois. I grew up around franchising. I saw what the franchise model did for my family. It allowed us, as I said, to achieve the American dream. Franchising works. It gives the independence to a person like my dad, someone like my brother, to partner with a company like McDonald's or many other franchises and still own their own business, but operate it in a way that's a mutually agreed upon agreement to provide whatever is necessary to their customers. It works all throughout small town America where I live. It works in our cities. It works everywhere. And I'm a prime example of making that happen. And my dad told me, though, growing up, Mike, he said, government matters and policies matter to the way he runs his franchise in Taylorville, Illinois. So I better pay attention, which might have been an inspiration for me to enjoy government a little bit and then get into government for the last 26 years of my life.
Rodney, that's great. So you grew up in the Midwest. You were really raised in McDonald's restaurants as part of the franchise model with your family. And then you, of course, headed to Washington, D.C. to serve in. But what do you recall about any encounters with government, maybe even before you served in government from the business perspective?
It's a great community. And my dad and mom would talk about the issues that they faced around our dinner table. Talk about how policies in Washington and in Illinois state capital of Springfield, how they impacted their ability to hire teenagers for their first job. Hey, look, I worked there when I was 14. Probably need a little labor law representation now, John. I might be able to go back on my mom and dad for doing that. But I enjoyed it because I got the best experience serving customers. And one thing that I learned is that working in a franchise set me up to be a better member of Congress and a better public servant, because I was used to serving customers from a very young age as I grew up in that franchise where we were at every single day of my life.
Great. So Rodney, you served in the U.S. Congress for several years, and you were perhaps unique in how you were steeped in franchising compared to some of your colleagues. What do government officials know or think about franchising in your view?
You know, it really depends on who you ask, Mike. In the end, it's going to depend upon who has the ear of that elected official more so than you as their constituent. And don't let that happen. I mean, that's really the key. I would urge everyone to ensure that they don't let their elected officials at all levels of government not understand that what a franchisee does in that elected official's community is much different than the perception that many elected officials have about companies like a McDonald's or like other franchises. You know, there's a lot of talk that somehow McDonald's is telling these franchises what to do in somewhat of a joint employer situation. That was the furthest thing from the truth. When I grew up with my family in our McDonald's franchises, we knew our family operated those franchises, but there was an agreed upon set of rules to be able to use that franchise name. And that franchising opportunity for us allowed me, when I got to Congress, to really try to be that leader in starting the Congressional Franchise Caucus so that my colleagues understood what franchising was and just didn't believe some of the false information or rhetoric that was out there in the public arena now.
Yeah. So we talked about that the stakes are a little higher for franchising already on this program, and it can feel like it's hard to break through if you're a person running your business out in America. But as an elected lawmaker, what types of constituents really got your attention?
The ones that were, number one, my constituents. And they wanted to, the best thing I would do if I was a franchisee in any business, I would invite my elected officials to come understand my business, understand how many employees I have that are their constituents, understand what my company does in their district and how it interacts within our local communities. We all know that the local franchisees, they're the ones sponsoring little leagues. They're the ones making sure the chambers of commerce still operate in our smaller communities. They're the ones that are helping community events and charity events on a regular basis. You know, understanding as an elected official the impact that every single business, especially our franchisees operations, understanding the impact they had in my district was done on a let me see it basis. I would travel throughout my district and visit franchises, in a wide variety of different parts of our economy. And I even got a chance to go visit some franchises other than my parents' McDonald's franchises and put my old McDonald's skills back to work in going around to meet new people in our communities. And understand too, the employees want to meet elected officials. And it's a great it's a great relationship building experience for your employees that are making that franchise operate every day.
That's super. You've seen government policies affect real people in your in your life growing up in a franchise family and as a government official. The name of this program is Government Impact on Your Bottom Line. Rodney, how have you seen government impact the bottom line of small business owners?
Well, government, and one of the reasons why I got into government and decided to become an elected official is because I saw government get engaged in too many aspects of our lives, be it through our tax code, be it through our regulatory environment, be it through local ordinances and zoning issues. In the end, America has become the greatest nation in the history of the world because of our entrepreneurial spirit. And really, I didn't see. I continued to see entrepreneurial spirit throughout the many franchises that I had a chance to visit, and it really showed me that if families are willing to take a risk themselves and convince a franchise to take a risk on them, usually it worked out because it was that driving spirit that entrepreneur had to really serve their community. And that to me is what we as policymakers needed to do to get government out of the way. And that was what I tried to do as an elected official for 10 years, taking what I learned from meeting with franchisees as part of leading the Congressional Franchise Caucus and taking what they told me and turning it into legislation and in many cases, making it become law. Look at your tax code changes in 2018. Look at some of the regulatory environment changes that help small businesses throughout our country that we were able to work on together. Those are the types of successes that are not limited to me and my service. They happen every day in governments, not just in Washington, but throughout the country.
Thanks, Rodney. I want to talk about joint employer for a minute because of all the tax and regulatory issues you just mentioned. The biggest issue facing franchising for the past 8-9 years has got to be joint employer. And the idea of brands being responsible for independent entrepreneurs and franchising doesn't sound good to the vast majority of franchisees. But there is some question brewing in certain circles within franchising that it could be palatable. And there seems to be increased questions about joint employers' impact. Would you tell us, from your expert perspective, your view of joint employer and what it's going to mean for the bottom line of franchise owners?
I think the joint employer standard that's trying to be implemented by many in Washington and throughout our country at the state level would be devastating to the experience I had growing up in a franchising family. We always knew, as I said earlier, Mike, we always knew that my dad was the owner operator. He could make the decisions that was best to run his business, which was a pillar in our community, helping to ensure that our community had the resources to continue to grow and thrive. The joint employer standard that is trying to be, that is being debated right now, I think would stop that individuality. It would take away the entrepreneurial spirit of what a franchisee wants to do to be able to run their own business under the guise and the agreement of working with a franchise. I don't believe that many small towns like the one I live in and the same one that I grew up in would be able to survive trying to figure out how to go through the corporate bureaucracy to find out if you can make a donation to a local charity that is supported now by your owner operators, by your franchisees. And in the end, I don't think it's good for America to have a system of small business operations that would be run by one giant corporation if the joint employer standard was implemented as intended by many in Washington who may lean toward one political party over the other.
That's right. People go into franchising to be independent, to run their own business, not to share responsibility with a partner. So, of course, we know the National Labor Relations Board is likely this summer to come out with a new negative, in our view, joint employer standard that could be really disruptive to the franchise model. And we've seen this movie before. From the 2015 to 2017 period in this country, we had a joint employer standard that was wide open and that makes every franchise system effectively a sitting duck to be named a joint employer by overzealous regulators. And you can go to a website called jointemployerfacts.com, anyone can, and you can see the economic harm on franchises during that 2015-2017 period. A huge increase in litigation and a huge increase in operational costs for both brands and franchisees, and all for what gain? It's very unclear. So it continues to be a big concern. So Rodney, thank you for your perspective. I want to see if there's any questions from the audience for Rodney, and we're going to turn to our moderator, IFA Zone, Anna Russell, for any questions for Rodney from our audience.
Thank you, Mike. We have an attendee asking, besides coming to Washington, D.C. in September for IFA's fly-in, what can franchisees do to make their voices heard?
Well, the fly-in's great. I always enjoyed meeting with franchisees in my office, and we would always make it a point to ensure that franchisees from across the nation, just not my constituents, got a chance to sit down with me and talk about my experience. I wanted them to leave my office and leave Washington, D.C. invigorated that members of Congress understood what they were going through in their local communities. But it also means, as I stated earlier, go back into your local community. Meet your elected officials, not just here in Washington. Get to know them at home. Ask them to come visit your franchises. The best learning tool I had to understand how policies in Washington affected small businesses in my district was to visit those small businesses, talk to their employees, see their operations, and in some cases, get back on the grill and start making some sandwiches again.
That's great. Great question and great perspective. And certainly we at IFA would be excited to help initiate a visit for any elected official in your area to come to any of your businesses, to our friends in the audience. So please reach out to me, reach out to our team at any time if you'd like to invite your local lawmakers to your business per Rodney's recommendation there. Okay, other questions, Anna, for now?
Yes, we have two attendees that have same question. So I'm going to group them together. What is their justification for the joint employer standard? Why are they pushing it? And if the joint employer rule is going to be released later this summer, does that mean that I will immediately become a joint employer with my franchisor?
Rodney, if you want
to
weigh in there.
I think you're going to see some extensive litigation if you see the language change that could delay any implementation of any possible ruling. But I'll let John give a better perspective, because I'm only a policymaker. I was a congressman. I'm not an attorney. I don't want to speak the language of lawyers. Sure. But in the end, it is a push for labor organizations such as the SEIU to want to be able to organize on a large scale basis without having to do it on an individual franchise by franchise basis. That's in my opinion, that's exactly why this is happening at the national level. And that concerns me the most, because you ought to be able to make that decision at your local level rather than having politicians who don't know what impact your franchise has in your community, having them do it out here and forcing you to have higher cost to operate, higher personnel issues, and in the long run, forcing you to pass on higher prices to your customers. That's wrong. Independence matters, entrepreneurship matters, and what this is an attack. It's an attack that is trying to disguise a labor push to organize restaurants and franchisees throughout this nation by going after their franchisor.
Yep. The stakes are high, no question about it. So Rodney, we really appreciate it. And if you will stick around with us for a few minutes, we may have more for you in a few minutes. But fortunately, after that great legal question, we do have counsel with today. And so let's now welcome in John Ring. And John, welcome, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
John, you are steeped in labor law, the topic of the previous question, and a lot of what franchise businesses are facing right now. Please tell us a little bit about your background and your government service.
Sure. So I recently completed a 5-year term on the National Labor Relations Board, and I served for roughly 3 years as chairman of the board, the first 3 years. It was my first time in government. Prior to serving on the National Labor Relations Board, I spent my entire career as a labor lawyer representing management interests in the private sector at the Morgan Lewis law firm. I will say what I found in government was a bit shocking. I always heard rumors of what it was like in government, but generally the folks I encountered in government had absolutely no idea what running a business was about. In fact, most of them had never been in the private sector, Rodney excluded, I guess. And really, what was really surprising to me was that despite having no experience, most of the government employees I encountered had no doubt about how to run your business better than you do, and no qualms about imposing their judgment on your business judgment. And at least that's what I found, at least in terms of the labor lawyers with the NLRB. My term ended in December, and I'm back in private practice. I like to say I'm back to solving problems instead of creating problems in government. I will just add, my story is not as great as Rodney's, but I did start and frankly was able to go to college because of my time working at McDonald's. I worked there in high school, and I will say I echo the points about the customer service and that we made. As a hiring partner at my law firm, I always look for somebody who had worked in a franchise, a fast food, or other industry, because it really is all about customer service, and it translates into almost everything you do later in life. So the franchise model and the opportunities that it provides are just really amazing.
John would call ourselves the world's greatest force training engine for a reason, because so many people are like you. They got their first job, they got advancement in their career in franchising at franchise businesses in their local community. So huge impact, huge set of opportunities for employees as well, not just franchisees. So that's all a picture of what's at stake in this business model. So, and we thank you for your government service, both you and Rodney. We needed you up there on all of these issues, but we're also happy you're in private sector and certainly with us today. So you talked about your experience in government was a little shocking. You heard Rodney talk about the perspectives of some of his colleagues in government. What's your take on what you've heard from Rodney and his government experience?
Well, I think I'd echo his point that really staying in contact with government officials is so important. Because they don't know a lot about what they don't know, and particularly about business. Staying in contact and making yourself heard is critical. I think it's also really important to make sure you know the issues, really know the issues, and not just what people are telling you about the issues, but to really understand the issues, and then be able to communicate with your elected officials. It's critically important.
Folks on this call are learning a lot about these issues from experts like yourself. So we thank you. And so everyone on this call is busy running their businesses, John. They're working hard. They're trying to hire and keep their staffs and generally serving their communities. They're pulled in a number of different directions, wearing so many hats as local business people. You've been on the inside in government. Why does the NLRB in Washington, D.C. matter to local business people?
Well, I think in the normal world, and we don't live in the normal world right now, but in a normal world, the NLRB would probably play a pretty minimal role for most businesses. The agency is responsible for unionization issues in the country. That is when employees in a particular workplace decide they need or want a union, the NLRB facilitates and actually runs, an election to see if a majority of the employees want to be represented by you. If those employees decide and that they want a union and they vote a union in, then the agency makes sure that the employer and the union engage in what is known as collective bargaining. And that's kind of the limited role that the agency, the NLRB, really should have. But as I said, that's in the normal world. Today, the NLRB and it seems like so many other government agencies in Washington, particularly, are engaged in really extreme overreaches to exert power and control over businesses and really in ways I don't think we've ever seen. For example, just in the NLRB, recently the board issued decisions that take away so many rights from employers, including restricting employers' rights to have uniform policies or dress codes, mandating what employers, including union and non-union employers, can put in their employment documents. These are just a few examples. And the NLRB also is looking for ways to make it easier for unions to organize businesses. Under the recent so-called micro-unit decision, the board says that small portions of an employer's workplace, like your maintenance employees, just subsets of your workplace or a particular shift of employees, can be organized without organizing the rest of the workplace. So of course it gives the union a nose under the tent and the ability to organize from within. So the NLRB really is imposing itself right now on into business operations, limiting the ability to the way businesses can run their operations, and I think it really should be a concern to most businesses.
Yeah, it seems like the NLRB, organized labor, they're trying to bring policies that shouldn't matter to local business people to their businesses and affect much broader swath of the business community, even out in America. And I think it's confusing, John, why joint employer is happening. There's a lot of confusion about why lawmakers and regulators would want to disrupt franchising, full stop, but also why they would want to make brands liable for their owners in their system. Would you tell us your take on joint employer? You're very steeped in it. You were a great protector of the franchise model at the board. Tell us your take on joint employer and what's your view on how it would affect the franchise business relationship?
Sure. Well, I don't think you can overstate the importance of the joint employer standard for the franchise business model. When I was chairman of the NLRB, and frankly, in recognition of the value and importance of the franchise model in this country, we issued a joint employer rule, and that was in 2020, that really tracked the traditional standard for determining the joint employer status. It's a standard that had been around for decades prior to the 2015 Obama era standard that went into effect that was really so detrimental. Our test, of course, looked at actual control and the degree of that control that each employer had over the employees, and it did provide that independence that most franchisees enjoy. We did it by rule because we thought that was the right way to give the most guidance and predictability and stability. Like I said, we overturned a prior rule that really had been so distorting of that independence that we looked to. The NLRB right now is engaged in rulemaking to replace our 2020 rule. That's the one that you talked about that's supposed to come out in August. The rule that the NLRB is currently considering and the proposed rule that they put out I think will literally destroy the joint employer distinction. I think the way it's drafted, everyone will be a joint employer. And frankly, I think that would really dismantle the franchise model. And really, I think it's really, as was said before, it's really an effort to do so that unions can organize and put pressure on one unified entity. So I really do fear a great destabilization and of the possibility of undermining the franchise model as we know it, which of course I think is the goal of the NLRB as being prompted by the organized labor movement.
Yeah, thanks, John. So as it relates to the joint employer issue, of course, we've seen this movie before, as mentioned, 2015 to 2017, we had a wide open joint employer standard. That's when so many additional costs and more litigation was coming at franchise businesses. And then the standard was restored by the NLRB while you were serving there, John. So it really is the John Ring majority at the board where we've had peace effectively on the joint employer issue for franchises these past 4 or 5 years. And that's largely due to your leadership there. We thank you for that. And now the standard, it appears, is going to ping pong back in a negative direction as early as this summer. So, John, the NLRB, meanwhile, has partnered with the same Federal Trade Commission that we're talking about more and more in franchising. The FTC is perhaps the primary federal government agency that regulates franchising nationwide. And now the NLRB, at a time when they're trying to disrupt franchising, is partnering with the FTC. What, as an NLRB veteran yourself, what does it mean to you that the NLRB has formed a partnership with the FTC at a time when FTC is clearly giving more attention to franchising?
Yeah, well, it's really part of what I was talking about before. This is the NLRB looking to expand its power and control over businesses, and partnering with the FTC and frankly with a number of other agencies to look for a way to impose itself in greater ways. When we were at the board, we saw our role as kind of staying within our lane of unionization and collective bargaining. And this board sees its role as the protector of all unionization everywhere, and so has really kind of moved into partnerships with other agencies in order to kind of expand its power and control. The current government programs that they put together, they talk about it in terms of a whole of government theory, which is this idea that bring all the government together to bring to bear and then be able to impose the greatest regulations and restrictions on your various government and on your businesses. And it's often cast in kind of non-threatening terms like information sharing or joint cooperation. But really, make no mistake about it, this is really government agencies joining forces, in this case the NLRB and the FTC, to be able to impose these employment overreaches, and do it through the FTC employment mechanisms. So I think the FTC, as the FTC looks at the franchising model and scrutinizes that, the NLRB is going to be behind the scenes looking to impose its views on union organizing, expand employee rights, and really limit employer ability to freely run their businesses, all under the guise of fairness and competition, or at least that's what I think is the stated goal that they'll use.
Yeah. Thank you, John, for connecting the dots of what this agency interaction means, and just translating the alphabet soup of Washington, D.C. agencies for our audience. Okay, let's check on questions from our audience for our panelists, and we can bring Rodney Davis back into the conversation. So I'll now turn to our moderator of today's program, IFA's Anna Russell, for any questions from our group.
Thank you, Mike. We have an attendee asking, does the joint employer standard impact other business models? Why is franchising being targeted?
Yeah. John, you want to take that one first?
Sure. Well, I think it does affect other business models, staffing, for example, staffing agencies and so forth. But the real thrust, and I think the real threat, is to the franchising model. Frankly, that's where a lot of the jobs are, a lot of the very good jobs are, and I think it's where the unions have targeted. Again, through the NLRB and through this administration, they have targeted, the wanting to go after those particular, groups of employees. So I think that's why you hear so much of this in terms of, the franchising threat by joint employers.
Yeah, it's very concerning to hear you say that, John. Of course, that franchising is the real target of this. There's a lot of business models out there, from construction to manufacturing to healthcare. There's a lot of contracting, a lot of business partners, obviously, in those models, and yet franchising may be the real target of the NLRB's joint employer push. That's definitely a concern. Anna, next question from our friends on the line.
Yep. Is the Congressional Franchise Caucus still in existence since you left, Rodney?
I believe it is. I don't know who took my spot since I left on January 3rd. Was it Mr. Rouser?
It's your old buddy, Josh Gottheimer of New Jersey. And he's joined by Kevin Hearn of Oklahoma. And
Kevin
Beth
Hearn,
Van.
what does he know about franchising?
Sure. Yes. Another former McDonald's franchise owner. Big McDonald's theme on our first town hall today. Also, Beth Van Dyne of Texas and Tony Cardenas of California. So we've got real coast to coast leadership on the franchise caucus here in DC in your wake, Rodney. But we're still going to need you and everybody else on deck to keep those guys moving.
All four of those folks are tremendously bipartisan when it comes to issues that are most important to their communities. And they all agree, or they wouldn't be co-chairs, that franchising is important to their respective communities and constituents they serve.
Yeah. Amid all the threats, this business community continues to have many champions in the halls of Congress and state legislatures around the country. And that's big time. So thank you. Anna. Yes, John.
I might just answer the question that was asked before, just about kind of if the joint employer rule it does come out this summer, kind of, are you immediately a joint employer, and kind of what happens? I will say this: if the joint employer, when the joint employer rule comes out, and the NLRB has targeted August, you should expect that the general counsel of the board, who's the prosecutor, and the regions of the board that are under her control, will immediately start issuing charges. There will be charges against franchisees, that we're talking about, alleging joint employer immediately. So I think the litigation will start, really immediately. Good news, I just said.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
Thanks, John, for that. Okay, other questions from Anna?
Yes, Eric asks, the NRLB, like much of government, continues to swing broadly from right to left, depending on who is sitting in the White House. Where can we find middle ground to protect the franchise business model?
Yeah, not at the NLRB. You know, unfortunately, the NLRB is kind of set up in a kind of political, way, and it does swing as the administration changes. And I think that pendulum swinging has gained traction over the last decade or so. When one party comes in, they swing it further and further. When I was chairman, knowing and having represented businesses, I knew that stability was more important than maybe getting the next largest swing. We tried to kind of restore a lot of what had been in place for decades, and with the idea that maybe that would be reciprocated when the Democrats, the majority, took over. That has not been the case. In fact, they swung the pendulum beyond what we ever could have imagined in many of the areas of labor law. So, it is really an unfortunate problem at the NLRB, and it's very hard for businesses, I know, to try to keep up with these ever changing legal landscape.
John, let me ask you, because, if the joint employer standard changes in a negative way, we'll certainly work with Rodney's former colleagues on the Hill to pass a legislative fix. But there's also legislation proposed to change the joint employer standard in a bad way for franchising. And this goes back to the misunderstandings of the franchise model, that so many lawmakers are supportive of an expanded joint employer standard. Can you talk about the difference between what the board may do this summer and legislation, if it were to become law, to amend the National Labor Relations Act to change the joint employer standard? How does the impact between a board rule and legislation, how does that differ in the impact on local business people?
Well, I guess in one way it would create some stability because it would be passed as a law and be in place. But I think, unfortunately, if the legislation that's been proposed passes, it would be, very, very detrimental to franchise fees and franchise model, frankly. And I think, despite, the downsides of the board's swings, at least there are times where we can rectify the swing the wrong way, and with a change in the interpretation of the National Labor Relations Act, and with the joint employer that makes sense for employers. If Congress passes the law, it's gonna be in place, and it's gonna be much harder to overturn. And all resources should be deployed to prevent a legislation on the dealing with joint employer, at least the way it's proposed now. It would be a great thing if we could pass legislation that implemented, the rule that we put in place, that the kind of the traditional joint employer rule that had, like I said, had been in place for decades. That would be a good thing. But the current legislation, it would not be would be terrible.
Right. The bad bill to pass a joint employer standard is called the PRO Act in Washington. That was job one for IFA over the last 2 years, the previous 2 years, working with Rodney and his colleagues on the Hill. They stopped it in Congress, and the good joint employer bill, in our view, is called the Save Local Business Act. Rodney was a big supporter and advocate for that. And I think our friends in Washington, the real champions of franchising, are going to try and push that again in the months ahead around the NLRB activity. Okay, Anna, I think we've got time for 2 more questions. If you'd like to read the next one from your queue.
Yep, the next question comes from Brian. He says, we have been trying to share your messages with my US senators, but they don't seem to listen. What is the best way to get a breakthrough?
Rodney, how do we break through with the United States Senate?
Just keep trying. I mean, in the end, they represent you, and eventually you can find them at a public event, and you ought to be able to walk up and say, hey, I've been trying to call your office. I'd love for you to come tour one of our facilities. And usually what happens is the member of the Senate in this case, or the member of Congress, they don't know that you've been ignored, and they're going to be upset when they hear from a constituent. And I spent 16 years working for a member of Congress before I got elected, after my McDonald's family experience. And the worst comments, the worst thing could happen to a staffer is having a constituent tell the member of the Senate or of the House that they didn't get a response when they called our office. Trust me, it will be noticed and it will be rectified. But don't just go to your senators. Don't just go to your governors. Go meet your member of Congress, your House member. I mean, it's always funny to me. You have groups that'll come out on fly-ins, and they will be roaming the halls of Congress, and they'll jump in an elevator with me, and I'll ask them, hey, where are you from? And they'll say, okay, well, I'm from, let's say, Colorado. I said, okay, where at in Colorado? Colorado Springs. Well, who's your member of Congress? And then they'd look at you like, I don't know. And then they'll name a senator, or they'll name the governor, or they might name a local legislator. And then I'll start going through the House members in their home state. Is it Ken Buck? Is it Jason Crow? Is it Lauren Boebert? Who is it? And they don't know. And that tells me that I need to go on to the next comment I usually make to them. And I say, well, you need to get to know that local member of Congress, because trust me, they've got a much more vested interest in what your community needs, because they serve a smaller area. So move beyond the senators. I know it's tough sometimes. You want to go meet your senator, you want to meet your constitutional officers, but get to know the people who represent you in the people's house, the United States House of Representatives.
That's great. And we're going to give everyone some resources in a moment to get them more plugged in with the IFA grassroots ecosystem. But if anyone doesn't know their local member of Congress, you can go to house.gov, www.house.gov, put in your zip code, learn your member of Congress. Many of you know it, but for those who don't, and if you'd like to set up an introduction again, or a visit to your store or unit, we at IFA would love to facilitate that. And if they continue to not be responsive, we can always help you, Brian, or any of our audience write an op-ed, and we can take our views on franchising to a more public forum if they won't respond. So, all right, and I think one more question for our guests, John and Rodney.
Last question comes from Scott, and Scott asks, what is the likelihood that this joint employer rule will come to fruition?
It's 100%. I mean, unfortunately, the board at this point is, well, you know what? I'll give it 90%. The board right now, the Democratic majority on the board, there's three members, and they are laser focused on getting this joint employer rule done. The comment period is closed, so that they're focused solely on getting that rule out. They've said they're going to get it out by August. If something happens and they can't get it out by August, and one Democrat, the reason they said August is because the one Democratic member of the board rolls off in August. If she were to roll off before the joint employer rule were put in place, again, slim possibility, but possible. Then it would have to wait until there's another Democratic majority. But it looks like they are focused on trying to get it out by August. So 90%.
Yeah, and if I could add something, Mike,
Please.
I agree. This is an issue that the Biden administration wants to push forward, and the Democratic members on the NLRB are laser focused on. Chairman Ring is absolutely correct. So you're sitting back, you're saying, what can I do about it? Well, now's the time to engage. Now's the time to take the advice to engage your policymakers back home, but also engage with the IFA. Make sure you come out and be a part of the IFA fly-in so that they know you not only in your district or in the district they represent back home, but they also know that you're dedicated enough to come to Washington and advocate for issues that are most important to you. But also understand there are individuals out there that will say the joint employer standard is good for franchisees. Personally, I fought against the joint employer standard my entire career in Congress. I do not subscribe to the theory that joint employer standard is good for any franchisee. I think it will devastate the franchise model as we talked before. But understand too, there's also a big difference between the labor organizations that are trying to push joint employer and other labor organizations that want to build things like pipelines, energy projects, buildings. Those types of labor organizations are not the ones behind this push for joint employer. So understand that too, so that you can focus your energy on where that energy needs to be focused to really truly have your voice heard and effectuate the policy issues the best.
Thanks, Rodney. And thanks, John, both for your perspectives on these. We're going to now, as we wind down this afternoon, we're going to give everyone a chance to do just what Rodney described, and that's engage. There's a few things that franchise owners who want to defend their businesses and franchise the entire franchise model can do as we face a new joint employer standard and other regulatory impacts. And first, we're going to show you some QR codes on the next couple slides. First, you see the first QR code on your screen pertains to the Federal Trade Commission, because the FTC, as we've talked about here in Washington, is scrutinizing franchising more these days. And they have recently put out a request for information on franchise business practices. And this request for information is currently available for franchise people to provide public comments on. And we are encouraging every franchise owner to share how important the franchise model has been to your livelihood through this RFI. So what you can do is simply get your phone and click on this QR code on your screen with your camera function. And this QR code will take you right to the IFA toolkit for the FTC that you see pictured on the left part of your screen. You can use that toolkit to submit comments directly to the FTC. And all you have to do is talk about your business, talk about how valuable the franchise model has been in your life, as Rodney explained so eloquently about his background, and encourage these Washington regulators at the Federal Trade Commission to please do no harm to the franchise relationship. It's a very important message to deliver. So please click on this QR code. Let's drive up the numbers of franchise comments that are in favor of this business model. Then we have another QR code for everyone to scan, and this is to join our Franchise Action Network. Rodney and John talked about the importance of being engaged. That's why IFA exists, is to facilitate connections between you at home and your lawmakers in Washington and state capitals around the country. So you can quickly join the Franchise Action Network, get our biweekly newsletter, hear about meetings and other bills moving in your local area that are going to affect your bottom line. That's what this program's all about. You click on this QR code with your camera function. You're going to join in just a couple of clicks our grassroots army of over 100,000 franchise business people nationwide. I know you're busy, but as Rodney and John have explained, it is just incumbent on franchise people to stay current, stay engaged on these policy issues today. And finally, our next franchisee town hall, we will meet again next week, May 24th, again at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, 12 p.m. Pacific, and we will discuss the Federal Trade Commission in more depth and specifically this request for information. So this final QR code on your screen, you can scan that with your phone and quickly register for next week's program. And from there, we will continue this town hall series. If you enjoyed it today with John and Rodney, we will continue beyond next week into the summer. After next Wednesday, our next program will be 3 weeks later on June 14th, and then bi-weekly on Wednesdays throughout the summer. So gang, that's all we have for today. We hope you enjoyed today's discussion. Our special thanks to John Ring, to Rodney Davis for joining us today. Our thanks to all of you who joined and watched. And we hope to see you next Wednesday on the next IFA Franchisee Town Hall. Thanks everybody for being here.